Most candidates assume that behavioral interviews would only assess your cultural fit with respect to the job that you're applying for. In reality, the definition of behavioral interviews is that they look at your past experiences as a predictor of success in your future role. So even someone who's not skilled, technically speaking, can predict your competency for the role. And I'm going to share with you 5 such scenarios. The first one would be when they ask you about a complicated delivery. In other words, one of the hidden behaviors that candidates get tested, especially in high-performing companies, would be on your ability to deliver. And it's not as if some candidate would magically say, hey, I cannot deliver in the role that I'm doing, but it's more on the lines of when you put pressure on a candidate and you ask a candidate a pressure question, such as tell me about the time when you were 75% through a project, program, or solution and got stuck. What did you do? What decisions did you take? And did the decision turn out to be the right one? Candidates who choose to present a situation where the outcome was not necessarily a successful one, in other words, I ask you about a challenging delivery and you tell me the delivery wasn't ultimately all that interesting, then that will raise serious suspicions about your ability to deliver in a job interview. The fix is quite obvious. You would want to share your success stories when asked about a challenging delivery. Of course, real-life situations are not always, you delivered a perfect solution, but your ability to deliver is critically important, and you'll be surprised about the number of candidates who present failure stories when asked for a challenging delivery. The second scenario I'd like to share with you here would be with respect to the deep dive test. And again, I'm assuming that your interviewer is a non-technical one, someone who's not particularly skilled in your subject area of expertise, yet still there's some well-known follow-up and challenge questions. Hey, can you tell me about this decision? Was this your decision? What metrics did you use to qualify the decision? What other numbers were important? Can you remember how big was your team? What other members of the team were involved? These sort of things, these sort of details, which in some cases candidates would struggle remembering during a job interview. Because what happens, in many cases, for many candidates, your best stories would have happened a few years ago. And if they happened a few years ago, chances are you will need a bit of time to remember all the key details. Okay, so if you fail to remember these details, these may raise some serious suspicions about the ownership of that decision, project, program, or solution, or whatever. And you may think, hey, but it's normal because it happened a long time ago. In my experience, the expectation is that going into job interview, you would prepare thoroughly on these things. And this is what I call, the fix to this would be to make brain dumps of your main stories, even over 2 pages, to write everything you can remember about them in a bit to prevent these deep dive tests, which again can be used to screen you for competency even by non-technical interviewers. The third example I'd like to share with you here would be the classic interview question, tell me about the time when you failed. And what happens here is there are still plenty of candidates who get caught by surprise here, not because you didn't know this question might get asked, but because you would present a superficial story, something that you would want to emphasize. It was nothing serious, nothing important. Not being able to speak about failure in a context of a growing experience, in a context where you learned a lot from that experience, is a signal of competency. So it can be used to screen you for competency in these job interviews, because if you learn nothing from your mistakes, that's a sign that in a high-performing environment where you have to adapt, to move quickly, to learn from your mistakes, you will not go well. You will not be able to perform in those types of environments. What's the fix here? You would want to prepare a failure story in which you'd want to talk about your learnings for at least 50% of the time and fully own that shortcoming, right? Without shooting yourself in the foot with monumental failure 2 months ago that got you fired from a previous role, of course. Right? The fourth example I'd like to share with you here would be the classic behavioral questions around conflict resolution. How do you handle conflict inside your team? Okay. And to give an example, I had a senior PM with 20 years of experience that I role-played this question with, to which they answered, Dan, you know what, in my 20 years of experience, I never had any major conflicts inside my team because I'm a very likable person. So if I'm a very likable person, it means I don't have much conflict. To a skilled interviewer, this immediately signals the fact that this candidate has never been part of a high-performing team. Is experience in a high-performing team a signal of competency for a senior TPM? I would say it's a critical one, right? So this is why competency, this is how competency or the lack of competency would show in your answers to a seemingly, a completely non-technical question, such as conflict resolution. And the last example I wanted to share with you here would be the rather classic scenario of I versus we in job interviews. And it's quite simple, if you're applying for an IC role, in an individual contributor type of role, and you say we did this, because who knows, maybe you like to be a team player, you like to show as a team player. In my experience, this is again something that the interviewer might use against you simply because you didn't own that that story in full, or they at least want, if they're well-intentioned, they would want to challenge you. But in my experience, the way it goes is not as if the candidate only says it once, we did this, but rather it's multiple times, and often in the same story. They would highlight the team effort while they're applying for an individual contributor role. This, again, in my experience, will raise some suspicion, of course, except if you're applying for a director level or a manager level role where, team spirit is an important asset. So these were my examples. I hope you found them useful, and thank you very much for watching.